Here we're going to look at two examples of being able to graph higher level polynomial functions, and we're going to look at these examples through the use of a graphing calculator. First and foremost, we need to note here when you are graphing there's a couple things that need to be taken into consideration. First, you will have at most n zeros, where n is the degree. And then you will have at most n minus 1 turning points. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind when you're graphing, is that you will have at most n zeros. So you look at the highest degree of your polynomial, and that's going to tell you how many possible times that graph is going to either touch or cross your x-axis. And then when you're trying to figure out your turning points, meaning the number of times that you change directions throughout your graph, you will take your degree, subtract 1, and that's your max number of turning points. So for example, if you had a degree of 23, then at most you would have 23 zeros, or 23 places where you cross or touch your x-axis. To find the number of times your graph is going to have a turning point or change directions, well, you would take that degree of 23 and subtract 1, which would give you 22, so you would have 22 possible turning points. Of course, no more, but there could be less. So it just depends on what your function is. Okay, now obviously that's a really big example, so let's look at a couple more examples that are a little bit more down to this level. So here, in order to graph, there's a few things that we need to keep in mind. First, you need to know the end behavior and the maximum number of real zeros and turning points that you may have. Second, you need to know your y-intercept. The third thing you need to know is how to graph it. Now, the easiest thing to do is to graph it in your calculator, a graphing calculator. And then you can use the functions of that calculator in order to help you with the x-intercept points, as well as to look at where you're crossing or touching that x-axis. That graphing calculator will also help you with the max or min values and what those values actually are, which is everything you need in order to sketch your graph onto a coordinate plane. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we have x to the fourth minus 4x cubed plus 3x squared. So the first thing we can do is we can make note about your max zeros. Well, my degree is 4, so the maximum number of real zeros could potentially be 4. We also can make note then at the maximum number of turning points. So that would be 3. 4 minus 1 gives you 3. So we have potentially 3 places in which our graph is going to change direction. Now there's some other things that we can look at, which is the end behavior. So notice I have an even degree and it's positive. So here, one of the things that tells me is that the tails are going to point up in the positive direction. The other thing I can look at is the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept says you're going to take every x value and change it to 0 and see what you get. Well, here that's going to give me the point 0, 0 as being my y-intercept value. Now there's a few other things that we need to be able to identify. First is going to be what your actual zeros are, and the second is going to be your min or max values. And so here, this is where we would go ahead and start using that graphing calculator. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure that you can kind of see this. without too much of a glare. Alright, so let's go ahead and try that. And of course, if this is hard to see, please let me know. I'm definitely all about trying to make changes so that this is a little bit easier. Alright, so the calculator that I have is the TI-84 Plus, and so that is what all of these examples and everything are going to be based on. That is the graphing calculator that I have. So, if you're watching these and your calculator is slightly different, please be aware that these directions, whereas they may be similar, will be different depending on the calculator that you use. Okay, so if you are using a TI-84 Plus like this, one of the things that you can notice is here across the top is our graphing stuff. So notice we have this y equals button. When you press that, that's what opens up your plot. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we need to input our equation, and so our equation is right here, and so we're going to input that exactly as we see it. Now notice I have this button here that says xt, and it will, this is going to be your variable, so if you click it, notice you get an x. Once you do that, we need a power. This hat button over here is your power. When you put that, notice it's going to raise it up, and then you just type your number. Now you get this little arrow in the top because you could just keep typing and put expressions up here. However, the arrow is blinking in order to signify that when you're done in your power, you need to use your arrow, that's this button over here, in order to drop back down into your actual equation line. Now here we're subtracting, so we're going to use our subtraction button. And then I have a 4, and now I want to do my x variable again. So this is going to be x. Again, we need a power, so we're going to hit that hat button, 3. We're going to arrow out of it, so we drop back down to our equation, and we're going to go plus 3. We're going to come over here to my x button, and then of course here we have hat for the 2. Now, notice on the side I have this x squared. So one of the things that we could have done, and I'll show you here, is I could have typed x and then just hit the square button here. That automatically drops the square in. So that is another idea or way that you can get x squared. However, the only way to change to a different exponent is going to be to use this little hat function. Now once we have everything input, the one thing that I really like to do first is I like to come over here to zoom, and I like to come down here to zoom standard. And I like to just set the graph in my zoom standard first. So I'm going to highlight the 6, I'm going to hit enter. It's going to think for a second, and what it's doing is it's actually putting my graph on a 10 by 10 axis. Now the reason I like to start there is because I like to see what I'm doing so that I can maybe change my window. So one of the things you could notice is that it doesn't really appear like we've got a lot on this negative x side, and it doesn't appear like we got a ton on this negative y side. But I do have something going in kind of right around here. So what I want to do is shrink this window down to kind of blow this up a little bit more. So to do that, says that we need to go here into window, and then notice I have x min, x max. You want to leave the scale alone, and then y min, y max. So here we're going to change this, and let's go ahead and change it to -3, and we're going to come over here to a 5, and then for the y, let's go ahead and go -5, and for the max, let's go ahead and go to 3 and graph it. Notice it's changed my window, and it's made things a little bit easier to see. Now if that's still not as clear for you, or as clear as you would like, you could shrink it in even further. So notice I wouldn't want to pull up my -y, but I could pull my x in a little bit and shrink my y down. So let's go back into the window. For my x min, let's go ahead and change this to being -1. I'm going to change my x max down to a 4. I'm leaving the y min alone, but let's change the y max down to a 1 as well and see what happens with that. And so notice here we are definitely pulling a lot closer in. And the reason we did that is because we really want to see what is going on at these values. Okay, and we want to be able to see what's going on here. So now that we've pulled ourselves in as far as we can, there's a few things that we can notice. Okay, first of all, it is very clear that we are simply touching the x-axis at 0. So we know that we have a point here at 0, and what we're doing is we are touching. Okay, so we kind of have this little loop going on. Now the other thing that it appears that we have going on is that we have a intercept, it looks like, here at 1, and it looks like we have another one here at 3. So we want to go ahead and test that theory. So the way we do that is we need to come up here and notice above we have these blue writings: stat plot, tables, format, calc. Calc is the important one. We're going to go second calc, and that's going to open up a window. Now for us, we want to use this window to determine our zeros. We're going to come down here to number 2, and we're going to hit enter. Now notice it's asking me to set the left bound. So I want to go ahead and come up here. So notice right here I'm kind of near the axis, so I'm going to come on this left hand side of it just a little, and then I'm going to hit the enter. Now it wants the right bound, so I'm going to come down through that intercept point and hit enter. And see how I've got these two arrows that are pointing in towards each other. So what that is saying is that somewhere between these two arrows lies the intercept point, and I want to find what that is. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. That's going to allow the calculator to take a second and calculate it out and spit out an answer. So it's blinking right here, and here it's telling you that that occurs at the point x is 1, y is 0. So one of the things that we definitely just did here is that we have found one of our zeros to be at the point 1, 0. Now the other thing that we know about it just by looking is that we are going to cross the x-axis at that point. Now we also know we have a 0 at the point 0, 0, and we know that we are simply touching it there. Now we need to find the other 0, and that's going to be this point y over here. So we're going to repeat the process we just did. So we're going to go second calc. We're going to come down here to 0 and hit enter. We're going to arrow our little point all the way over to where we're getting kind of close. Okay, so notice here we are definitely on the left hand side of that point. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter, and then we're going to come up to where we're definitely above. We're going to hit enter. So somewhere between those arrows is going to be my point, and notice I get the point 3, 0. So here the other 0 that I have is at the point 3, 0, where we are going to cross, and that's exactly what I was expecting. Now the last thing that we have really to look at is max or min points, and of those we have 2 of them. Oops. So if you look, I have a hump right here and I have one down here. So again, we're going to go second calc. This time we're going to choose, notice you can do a minimum, you can do a maximum. So let's start with the minimum because we're closer. We're going to hit enter. Again, it's asking you for the left bound. So we want to be on the left hand side of my little valley. So we're going to kind of arrow this down, around, and over. Make sure we're on the left hand side. Hit enter. We're going to go around to the right and hit enter. We're going to guess, and it's going to give us a result. So here this is telling us that we have a minimum value. And we're going to go ahead and round that to the nearest tenth just to make it easy for ourselves. So here we have a minimum at the point 2.4, negative 4.8. Now we need to repeat this process one more time, but this time as a maximum. So again, we're going to come all the way up. Sometimes it takes a while. Alright, we're going to make sure that we are definitely on the left-hand side of my, I guess you could call that your mountain or whatever, and hit enter. Then, just like before, we're going to come all the way around to the right-hand side and hit enter. And then we're going to go ahead and guess. And so here it's going to tell us that we have a maximum point. So that maximum point is going to be the point 0.6 and 0.3. Alright, so once we've done all of that, we have everything that we need. So let's go ahead into our graph here, and let's use this information we have to sketch our graph and then check it. So we have this tiny little piece right here, and then we're going to come all the way down to negative 4.8. So we're going to go, here's 2, we're going over a little, and we're going to be down here at almost 5. So this is going to come down, and then it's going to go straight back up, crossing through the intersection and up. And then this one, we already knew, is going to go up. Now if you look at this, and you look at our graph, notice they look to be about the same. One way that you could check it is you could come back here into your zoom. You come down to zoom standard and hit enter. And notice my graph here was a 10 by 10. Notice this one's going to be your 10 by 10, and notice this to that look about the same. Alright, so let's make sure that we definitely have a solid understanding of working with that graphing calculator. So we're going to do all of that one more time, only this time we're using this equation. So first and foremost, I would list out what we need to know. We need to know maximum zeros. We need to know your maximum turning points. We need to know your tails. We need the y-intercept. We need to know your zeros. And we need to know a maximum and a minimum. Okay, so that is everything that we need to know. So let's fill in what we can before using the calculator. So first and foremost, the maximum number of zeros I have is the highest degree, so this would be 3. Turning points would be subtract 1, so this is 2. My tails here are going to be negative. My degree is odd, so this is going to be negative and opposite. My y-intercept says plug a 0 in for x, and what you get left over is the y-intercept, so this is going to be 0, negative 8. Then I have my zeros, my max, and my min. Okay? So at this point we can go ahead and we can start working on its graph. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit this y equals button. Now there's a few things you can do. First of all, you could keep this and come down here to the second one, or you can just go ahead and clear it out by hitting the clear button. And that allows you to enter in a new equation. So here we've got negative, so we're going to use this negative, can't see that. You're going to use this negative button down here. And we're going to have x to the third, arrow out of it. And now we're going to have plus 2x squared plus 4x minus 8. Again, we want to make sure we start, so I'm going to come over here to zoom, I'm going to come down here to standard, and I'm going to go ahead and start with a standard zoom and see where that gets us. So one of the things that you can notice is that the maximum number of turning points I have is 2, and if you look here, I have a valley and I have a hill, 1 turning point, 2 turning points, so I know I don't have to try and zoom this out any if I don't want to. However, I do want to try and pull it in a little bit further just to make it easier to see. So what I would do is I would drop my y-axis down a little bit lower to kind of blow up this area a little bit. So let's go ahead, go into that window and make some changes here. So one of the things that we're going to go ahead and do is leave your y min alone, but we're going to change the x, and let's go ahead and change that to being -3. My x max will go ahead and reduce down to 5. We're going to leave the y min alone, but my y max, I'm going to go ahead and pull all the way down to 1 and regraph that. And the reason I'm doing this is because we really want to see what was going on at these two places here. Okay. And so there we have it. That's kind of a snapshot, a close in of what's going on with my graph. So let's go ahead and first let's figure out these zeros here. So it's very clear that I have one that's crossing and one that appears to be touching. So let's go ahead and find those. So again, you're going to go second calc, or I guess it's second trace to get to calc. And we'll come down here to 0 and hit enter. And then we're going to go ahead and pick. So here I'm fairly close to this one, so I'm going to go ahead and use this one first. So we're going to hit enter on the left, scroll over and around to the right, hit enter again, and then enter for guess. And it's going to come up and tell you what it is. So here, notice I have 1.9999996. So that's really, really close to being 2. So we would just go ahead and say that we have a 0 at the point 2, 0. Now the other thing we know about it is that we are touching at that spot. That being said, we need to do it one more time, come down to 0, and we need to find the others. So we're going to go ahead and move the x all the way over, and yes, it does get to be irritatingly frustrating. And we'll hit enter. Now notice I can't see the blinking light here anymore, but I was looking at my y. Notice my y is a positive value, and so that's one way that I know that I'm definitely on the other side, or the left hand side of that intercept point. I'm going to pull this down. Notice now my y is becoming negative. So that is one way that I know that I'm now on the right hand side. I'm going to hit enter to guess, and it's going to tell me that I have a 0 at the point -2, 0, where we are crossing. Now the last thing we need to include, so I'm going to just move this over here, is my max and my min. So again, second calc, we're going to come down to minimum. We're going to come down to the left hand side of that valley. We're going to swing it around to the right hand side and go ahead and guess. And here this tells us that we have a minimum at the point -0.7, -9.5. So I rounded to the nearest tenth just to make it a little easier on myself. And then last but not least, we need the maximum. So we're going to continue on our little trek up towards the top of our hill, hit enter on the left, Scroll all the way around, enter to the right, and let it do the hard part. So we're going to guess that that maximum is going to occur at the point 2, 0. Now that I have everything I need, I can go ahead and sketch my graph and see what it looks like. So here, the first thing I want to do, I have a y-intercept at -8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I have my zeros, so I have the point at -2, so 1, 2, 0, and 2, 0. Alright, so what do I know? I know that right here is coming through. I also know that I have a minimum at -9.5. So we're going to have almost 1. Here's 9.5, so it's going to kind of be down there. So we've got this piece which is coming down here. It's going to then shoot up. It's going to come up to my point, and then it's going to come back down in that direction. And then this is going to go on forever. Now the nice thing is you don't have to be a perfect artist. Okay, notice my lines look some pretty funny. But if I were to go zoom standard one more time and pull it back, notice it looks very similar to the graph that we just drew. So there you have it. That is the basics of the beginning of being able to graph polynomial functions with higher degree levels. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have any questions about your graphing calculator, again, remember the one that I have is this TI-84 Plus. If you have something else, I can try my hardest to try and help you out. Please let me know. Do not hesitate to ask questions. Otherwise, I do hope you had fun. I do hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you next time.